Hello everyone, my name is John Sierra and I'm a Tolkien scholar, meaning that I live and breathe the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I'm here to answer all your questions about his work. If you have questions for me, you can of course ask me in the comments and I'll answer you right there. If you want your questions answered in an actual video, the best way to do that is through Quora. There is a link to my account in the description. You can simply ask me a question there, and of course other people may weigh in with their voices as well, which is sort of the wonderful thing about Quora. You can ask a question and even ask a specific person a question, but anyone can really answer, and you can get a variety of different takes. Just one thing to tell you guys, and since this is a little bit exciting for me, I have become part of sort of a council of lore masters on the website Quora called The Nine. I'm known as Lore Master 2, and of course I still use my real name, but that's sort of my title in the Council of the Nine, and we're a peer review group that writes papers on some of the deeper mysteries of Middle-earth and Tolkien's works in general. And my first paper on the origin of hobbits, which I think I'm going to do a video about separately at some point, was submitted and peer-reviewed and got a very good response. So if you go to my account, the link, of course, as I mentioned, is in the description. I do have it pinned. If you look at my answers, it is always at the top there, and will be for some time. So I suggest, if you're interested in my theories as to the origin of hobbits and how they came about and why they came about, and a little bit of their history, and I say a little bit when I really mean a lot of their history, the link's right there. So of course I'm probably going to do a video speaking about it, but I did want to mention the written form is out there, has been through peer review, and the rating that I got is a 3 out of 9, which basically, the lower the number, the better. Basically, 1 to 3 is the range we're really aiming for, whereas like a 7 to 9, we would really want to avoid that entirely. But a 3 is canon by preponderant evidence, so I'm rather happy about that. But anyway, guys, let's get to a reading. I do have a lot of questions for you to answer for you today. I believe, how many do I have? I think 18. Yeah, I have 18. Last week I only did something like 13, and I picked less because I had some that I had a lot to say about. And I picked 18 this time, and still some of them I have a lot to say about. So I'm going to try to do this quickly, but not too quickly. But I am going to read a little bit of the Fellowship of the Ring for you, and I decided the very end of Book 1, from the chapter Flight to the Ford. Basically the last 2 pages here of Book 1 before it goes to Book 2, which starts with many meetings in Imladris and the Council of Elrond and whatnot. But this is the scene, I'm just going to set this up for you very briefly, where Frodo has met Glorfindel and has been given his horse Asfaloth and is in flight towards Imladris and is being pursued by the Nazgul, the Black Riders, with Glorfindel also behind, driving them into the Ford of Bruinen, and where they are washed away. So let's read that part. Frodo looked back for a moment over his shoulder. He could no longer see his friends. The riders behind were falling back. Even their great steeds were no match in speed for the white elf horse of Glorfindel. He looked forward again, and hope faded. There seemed no chance of reaching the ford before he was cut off by the others that had lain in ambush. He could see them clearly now. They appeared to have cast aside their hoods and black cloaks, and they were robed in white and grey. Swords were naked in their pale hands, helms were on their heads, their cold eyes glittered, and they called to him with fell voices. Fear now filled all Frodo's mind. He thought no longer of his sword. No cry came from him. He shut his eyes and clung to the horse's mane. The wind whistled in his ears, and the bells upon the harness rang wild and shrill. A breath of deadly cold pierced him like a spear, as with a last spurt, like a flash of white fire, the elf horse, speeding as if on wings, passed right before the face of the foremost rider. Frodo heard the splash of water. It foamed about his feet. He felt the quick heave and surge as the horse left the river and struggled up the stony path. He was climbing the steep bank. He was across the ford, but the pursuers were close behind. At the top of the bank, the horse halted and turned about, neighing fiercely. There were 9 riders at the water's edge below, and Frodo's spirit quailed before the threat of their uplifted faces. He knew of nothing that would prevent them from crossing as easily as he had done, and he felt that it was useless to try to escape over the long, uncertain path from the ford to the edge of Rivendell, if once the riders crossed. In any case, he felt that he was commanded urgently to halt. Hatred again stirred in him, but he had no longer the strength to refuse. Suddenly, the foremost rider spurred his horse forward. It checked at the water and reared up. With a great effort, Frodo sat upright and brandished his sword. "Go back," he cried. "Go back to the land of Mordor, and follow me no more." His voice sounded thin and shrill in his own ears. The riders halted, but Frodo had not the power of Bombadil. His enemies laughed at him with harsh and chilling laughter. Come back, they called. "To Mordor we will take you." "Go back," he whispered. "The ring, they cried with deadly voices. And immediately their leader urged his horse forward into the water, followed closely by 2 others. "By Elbereth and Luthien the Fair," said Frodo, with a last effort, lifting up his sword, "ye shall have neither the ring nor me." Then the leader, who was now half across the ford, stood up menacing in his stirrups, and raised up his hand. Frodo was stricken dumb. He felt his tongue cleave to his mouth, and his heart laboring. His sword broke and fell out of his shaking hand. The elf horse reared and snorted. The foremost of the black horses had almost set foot upon the shore. At that moment there came a roaring and a rushing, a noise of loud waters rolling many stones. Dimly Frodo saw the river below him rise, and down along its course there came a plumed cavalry of waves. White flames seemed to Frodo to flicker on their crests, and he half fancied that he saw amid the water white riders upon white horses with frothing manes. The 3 riders that were still in the midst of the ford were overwhelmed. They disappeared, buried suddenly under the angry foam. Those that were behind drew back in dismay. With his last failing senses, Frodo heard cries, and it seemed to him that he saw, beyond the riders that hesitated on the shore, a shining figure of white light, and behind it ran small shadowy forms waving flames that flared red in the grey mist that was falling over the world. The black horses were filled with madness, and leaping forward in terror, they bore their riders into the rushing flood. Their piercing cries were drowned in the roaring of the river as it carried them away. Then Frodo felt himself falling, and the roaring and confusion seemed to rise and engulf him together with his enemies. He heard and saw no more. And that's actually the very end of Book 1. Put that back in its case, and let's get to your questions, because we have some really, really good ones and some weird ones, but mostly some really, really good ones to get through today. Let's see, where are we starting? Okay, I believe we're starting over here. Okay, here's the first question. This one was submitted by, oh wow, how am I going to say that? Logan Gerbrocht. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Logan Gerbrocht asks, what happens when Sauron is reunited with his ring? Is he invulnerable? I thought Isildur simply severed his hand. Couldn't this be done again? Well, Sauron couldn't be invulnerable, as it were, and Isildur did not actually sever his hand, at least not his entire hand. The One Ring does give Sauron the power of domination, especially over the bearers of the Rings of Power, which, if they fall under his dominion, can become permanently bound to Sauron and to the One, which is what happened to the 9, the Nazgul, permanently bound to them, Sauron and the One. Being reunited with it would be bad for the free peoples of Middle-earth. Not just because it's extra power for Sauron, but due to the fact that the 3, the bearers of the 3, would no longer feel safe using their rings. They couldn't use them any longer. This would reduce the protection afforded to Imladris and Lothlorien, as well as forcing Gandalf to abandon the use of his ring. And we're going to talk extensively about Gandalf's ring today, as you might have noticed from the title of the video and the thumbnail of the video, and I promise it won't be the last question this time. Another reason that Sauron regaining the ring would be bad is because it's the only avenue to defeat him in a permanent way, is destroying the ring. The One Ring would not make him invulnerable. He was defeated in the past when he had it in the Second Age, but he can always return from these defeats and these deaths to trouble Middle-earth again. In destroying a large portion of his power that was housed in the One Ring, he was made so weak that he could never again regain power. Isildur did not fight Sauron like you saw in the film, nor did he cut off his hand. Sauron was defeated by Isildur's father Elendil and Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor of Middle-earth, and all three of them died in this battle. Though Sauron could return easily, Gil-galad was an immortal elf. He would be reincarnated in Mandos. And of course, Elendil, as a mortal man, he passed away. He passed from Arda. So Isildur wound up preventing Sauron from returning immediately, or at least delaying his return, by cutting the ring from his hand. That was the exact word that Tolkien used, cutting the ring from his hand, and it was specified that this means that he cut off Sauron's finger, not his entire hand, because later in The Lord of the Rings, Gollum noted that Sauron had 9 fingers on his black hand, but those are plenty. Okay, next question, and I promised you that the thumbnail question wouldn't be at the very end this time, and here it is. What is Gandalf's ring Narya capable of doing? So, not a whole lot in terms of power. It's not a powerful magical artifact like some people that I've seen. A lot of people in Quora think that it helps him with fire. And some people have thought when he said to the Balrog, Flame of Anor, he was referring to his ring. But and it is sometimes called the Ring of Fire, but that's because it has a ruby gemstone. Narya, which is also known as the Red Ring, was given to Gandalf by Círdan upon his arrival in Middle-earth. Círdan's words were the hints towards the actual ring's function. So let's look at the words in the story, the Astari. For, said he, great labors and perils lie before you, and lest your task prove too great and wearisome, take this ring for your aid and comfort. It was entrusted to me only to keep secret, and here upon the west shores it is idle. But I deem that in days ere long to come, it should be in nobler hands than mine, that may wield it with the kindling of all hearts to courage. And the grey messenger took the ring, and kept it ever secret. Yet the white messenger, who was skilled to uncover all secrets, after a time became aware of this gift and begrudged it. And it was the beginning of the hidden ill will that bore to the grey, which afterwards became manifest. So the 3 were made by Celebrimbor after Annatar, who was Sauron in disguise, had taken leave of Eregion. And they were made not as weapons, but as protection against evil and for the preservation of life. We see this in the usage of the blue ring in Imladris and the adamant ring in Lothlorien. The 3 rings are not weapons. And as I mentioned, Flame of Anor, it has nothing to do with the ring. It's merely Gandalf boasting of his proficiency with fire and comparing it to the sun, which is called Anor. In this passage, Círdan mentions aid and comfort for Gandalf. Now, you might ask why Círdan in this instance decided that Gandalf needed aid and comfort when Saruman and Radagast were also present. They had arrived at the same time. And in some versions of the story, also Alatar and Palando and several unnamed lesser wizards were there as well. So why did Círdan single out Gandalf for this gift? Well, for this we must go to Círdan's observations about the Astari from the previous paragraph. So I'm in the same story, the Astari, but I'm going back a little bit to the previous paragraph. Of this order the number is unknown, but of those that came to the north of Middle-earth there were... where there was most hope, because of the remnant of the Dunedain, and of the Eldar that abode there, the chiefs were 5. The first to come was one of noble mien and bearing, with raven hair and a fair voice, and he was clad in white. Great skill he had in the works of hand, and he was regarded by well nigh all, even the Eldar, as the head of the order. Others there were also, 2 clad in sea blue and 1 in earthen brown, and the last came one who seemed the least, less tall than the others, and in looks more aged, grey hair and grey clad, and leaning on a staff. But Círdan from their first meeting in the Grey Havens divined him in reverence, and he gave to his keeping the 3rd ring, Narya the Red. So Saruman is described as being noble, tall, raven hair, fair voice. Gandalf, he's less tall, he's old, he has grey hair, he's leaning on a staff. He seems to be the oldest of the wizards and the least among them. These guys are fresh from Valinor in new incarnated bodies, and Gandalf already is old. He already appears old, while the others are not old. Now, let's go to another quote from Círdan. This time I'm going to go to the Lord of the Rings. "Take this ring, master," he said, "for your labors will be heavy, but it will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself, for this is the ring of fire, and with it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill. But as for me, my heart is with the sea, and I will dwell by these grey shores until the last ship sails. I will await you." So in this quote, Círdan recognizes that by choosing an older body, Gandalf has taken weariness upon himself. He is not virile and straight of posture like Saruman. He is bent over his staff. Later on in the Third Age, when Gandalf the White is about to confront Saruman, Gimli insists on coming with Legolas in tow, for they are the only of their races represented in this meeting. But also Gimli is curious as to whether or not Saruman looks like Gandalf. Gimli describes them as like and yet unlike. Saruman's raven black hair has gone almost entirely white, except for some black right around his mouth. Saruman, in over 2 millennia in Middle-earth, has aged and he has become old, while Gandalf was already old and remains much the same. From this we can deduce that Olorin, that's Gandalf, in his wisdom, chose the guise of a much older man to give wisdom and counsel to the children of Ilúvatar, but in doing so has taken on a heavier burden, the pains, the discomfort, the weariness of an aged body. As we can demonstrably see that the bodies of the Astari do indeed age, though slowly, Gandalf's ring has likely greatly slowed down or perhaps completely halted the aging process and eased his aches and pains over the long years. From this, we can additionally extrapolate that the red ring likely gives Gandalf a lot of stamina. In Moria, when he encounters the Balrog, he laments that he is already weary. He's tired, and here is a Balrog. But he still had enough energy not only to face off against the Balrog, but to fight it and to chase it and to battle it for 11 days straight without rest and without food or water before he succumbed. So while the red ring doesn't give him great power in terms of his magic, it does seem to give him endurance and comfort and aid and the courage to rekindle hearts and all that. So it's more subtle is what I'm getting at. And I forgot to mention that question was submitted by Mark Moniz. Hope I'm saying it right. Okay. Next question. Okay, this is a funny one. This was from Peter Ramirez, who asked, how did hobbits have potatoes as a staple in their diet if potatoes weren't introduced to that part of Middle-earth until several thousand years after the elves left for Valinor and the hobbits went completely into hiding? What are you talking about, man? What are you talking about? Who said that? Who said that potatoes weren't introduced to that part of Middle-earth until thousands of years later? Not Tolkien. Now, I know who said it. People who like to try to come up with inconsistencies and point them out to try and feel superior, like they could have written the book better. Well, like Spinal Tap before me, I shall bring some color into their dull gray lives. The idea that potatoes occurring in the Shire, it is based off the idea that if Northeast Middle-earth is Europe in the distant past, it doesn't make sense for potatoes to be there because they're indigenous to South America. They weren't introduced to Europe at that time. They were not there. They were not introduced that far back, as they say. There's sort of two answers here. There's an in-universe answer. There's an out-of-universe answer. I'm going to handle the in-universe answer because it's easy. It's very obvious. The Lord of the Rings is a... Actually, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm gonna take the out of universe approach first. I normally don't do this, but I'm gonna go out of universe before I go in universe. So the Lord of the Rings, it's fantasy, man. It's a story. It's not meant to be realistic in any way. It needs to be internally consistent within itself. It can't contradict itself, but it can contradict reality, because that's what fantasy is all about, is contradicting reality. If it was consistent with reality, there wouldn't be hobbits, there wouldn't be dragons, there wouldn't be Sauron or Gandalf or any of this. It wouldn't exist. So the Shire is not literally England in the past. It's an idea of an idealized pastoral England of the author's youth, and he considered potatoes to be far too important to the culture of rural England to leave them out, just because it was in the past. Now, it's not actually in the past. It's Middle-earth's not real. It's not our actual past. It's a mythological past, a fictional past. So if Tolkien says there's potatoes, then there are potatoes. Now, maybe there weren't actually potatoes. It could have been just some vegetable that he was unfamiliar with when translating from Westron to English. So he thought, well, maybe they mean potato. Maybe it was linguistically similar to potato. Maybe he thought, well, that's close enough. It could have been beetroot for all we know. Now, let's go in universe and explain this. Basically, the answer comes down to, because the Lord of the Rings is like I said, a mythological past. It comes down to know you. Pipeweed is said to be, by Tolkien, a form of nicotiana, which is tobacco. And that is also indigenous to the Americas, not to Europe. So now it's explained in universe because the plant was taken from Numenor, which is analogous to the fictional continent of Atlantis, and brought to Middle-earth that way. And they didn't really know what applications it would have until the hobbits discovered it and started smoking it. So, you know, there you have something that's not supposed to be in that part of the world, but is because of intervention from fictional foreigners from Numenor. And I'm not saying that potatoes are from Numenor, or that potatoes are from Aemon, or potatoes are from anywhere else. But if you insist, based on a very weak assumption, I think, that they cannot possibly be native to Eriador, then they were native to somewhere else and they were brought there. And if we must accept that Middle-earth is a literal past, which of course it's not, it's mythological, then we can assume that potatoes were there, and then they went extinct, and then they were brought back. And when I posted this on Quora, there were some people in the comments who brought some very insightful comments about horses that were indigenous to the Americas, and they went extinct. And then they were reintroduced from places like Europe and Africa. So, you know, there's no reason to worry about that too much. Your mind need not boggle. Okay, next question. This is from Timothy Blaisdell. I hope I'm saying it right. In The Lord of the Rings, why is depth in the ground equated with evil? I'm interested in both in-universe and out-of-universe answers. So I don't think your assumption is true. I see how you got there, but it's not specifically depth that is associated with evil, but it's aversion to light. In The Lord of the Rings, there is very little that is mentioned to be so deep other than Moria, and beyond that, the Balrog, and beyond that, the Nameless Things. The Balrog is certainly evil, but its former upstairs neighbors, the dwarves, were not evil. Dwarves generally love to live underground, and they were not only not evil, but they were said to be specifically resilient against Sauron's corruption. He could not make them into his servants with the One Ring. He could only make them jerkier. So elves will even live underground when needed. They don't prefer it, but they will do it, like Thranduil's people, Nargothrond and such. So evil can live quite high up as well. The Dark Lord Sauron is up on his throne in Barad-dûr, a very high tower. In the older stories, we see a lot of the same. Evil can be low in pits, or it can be up in high towers, and the good guys will be at any elevation. The Balrog was under Moria because it was hiding. It had fled the War of Wrath. It was essentially a refugee. So what we see through this is a lot of the breeding of evil things were in the dark pits of the earth. This is not so much an affinity to be low down in the earth, it was to be away from light. The sun stymied Melkor and his creations, which were created in a time before the sun, could not bear the sun. The orcs were pained in the sun, the trolls were outright killed by it. So it became normal for these creatures to seek the dark, which during the day often meant staying underground. This doesn't have any sort of hidden symbology. Dwarves delve for wealth, and because they prefer living in the earth, they have no particular aversion to the sun. They love light, they love lamps. So, you could make an argument for Morgoth's ring and the earth and such, but I really don't think that Tolkien meant for the depths of the earth to be necessarily equated with evil. Okay, next question. What is Durin's crown in The Lord of the Rings? It's possibly a constellation or possibly just a vision. The doors of Durin, leading into Moria, were adorned with 7 stars. And now 7 stars is a symbology that you see a lot in Tolkien's work. There's a constellation of 7 stars that the elves called Valkyria, or Sickle of the Powers, Sickle of the Valar. And in Middle-earth, it was called the Wain. The Valkyria is understood... I'm sorry, not Valkyria. I'm saying it wrong. Valakirka. It's not the easiest word to say. Valakirka. It's understood to be the same thing that we would call the Big Dipper. 7 stars is important symbology as well in Numenor, and it was with the standard with the White Tree of Gondor and the 7 stars of Numenor that Aragorn bore into the Pelennor Fields. Durin's crown may be the same constellation, the Valakirka, or it could be a different one made out of 7 stars, or it may not actually have been a constellation at all. Durin, having come to the Misty Mountains, looked into the lake that we now know as the Mirror, and saw 7 stars above the head of his reflection as if a crown above his head. This may have been the literal reflection of stars above him, or it could have been a magical vision, because this was the event that inspired him to create Khazad-dûm, the dwelling of the dwarves. Either way, Durin's crown has equal importance to the dwarves that the Valakirka does to the elves, or the Wain does to men. All of these cultures have taken 7 stars as important symbology. Okay. Next question. Let's see. Why was the riddle on the door to Moria written in Elvish in Lord of the Rings? I'll get to that in a moment, but first I have to say there wasn't actually a riddle on the door. Thinking that there was a riddle was the mistake that Gandalf made. The doors used to stand open in friendlier days, and they were often used by the elves, who were in friendship with the dwarves, even if they didn't care for being that far underground. There were friendly door wardens to welcome the elves into Moria, though in the case that there were none and the doors were closed, there was writing on the door, and it wasn't a riddle, it was instructions on how to open it. Say, friend, and enter. Now, just think, if Gandalf had read it out loud in Sindarin, the door would have popped right open. But instead, he translated it for his friends so that they could understand. I mean, Legolas would have understood the Sindarin, and Aragorn would have understood the Sindarin, and Boromir may have understood a bit of it. Frodo, maybe a little bit, but the rest of them, not so much. Gimli certainly not Merry or Pippin or Sam. So he said it in Westron. So in Sindarin, the word speak and the word say, they're the same word, pedo. Gandalf knew that pedo meant speak, so he thought the instruction was to speak a password of some sort. Indeed, the linguistic application was quite literal, to speak the word friend and enter. Gandalf had forgotten how much better those days were for the elves and the dwarves, and it was a perfect example of the smartest guy in the room overthinking the situation. Now, why was it written in Elvish? I kind of covered that. You might have guessed already. It's because that door was made for the elves to use. It faced Eregion. The elves also helped make the door, so that's a big part of it as well. Okay, next question. How long do the dragons of Middle-earth live? I don't know. The lifespan of the dragons has not really been put to the test, so to speak. Dragons obviously age to maturity, as is mentioned that their lives are long and slow. we never hear of them growing old and dying naturally. They may be functionally immortal in the sense that Ents seem to be functionally immortal. They'll just live until something kills them, not to be confused with the immortality of elves who cannot pass from Arda. Either way, the only named dragons that we hear of, we don't hear of them dying naturally, we hear of them being slain. We hear of Smaug and Calagon and Glaurung and Skaitha. And there were a great many other dragons that we didn't know the names of, or they didn't have names, and then there were all these broods of dragons out there. No one in Middle-earth was studying their lifespans. There weren't, like, dragon anthropologists out there. Tolkien never really answered this question either. The closest that he came to it was in letter 144. He said that he never wrote about the end of the dragons, just that there were no more in the late Third Age that would have had fire that could consume the One Ring. He wasn't saying that there weren't dragons around, he was just saying that they weren't as powerful. They were diminishing. They were less magical and less grand than they used to be, and a lot of many magical things were diminishing in the Third Age and on into the Fourth Age. It's possible that the magic was being bred out of them, and it could be that old dragons were losing their potency, or it could be that old dragons were dying off and new dragons were being born weaker, or it could be both. They're probably in Florida right now having burgers thrown at them by tourists. So. Okay, next question. Let's see. In The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, why do the eagles come to the battle at the Black Gate? It's pretty far out of their territory. They're known to opportunistically attack orcs, like in the Battle of Five Armies, but that was not so far as Mordor is from their territory. I think the hint in why the eagles came in force to Moranon is what Gwaihir said to Gandalf afterwards. Gandalf asked him to bear him to Mordor, and Gandalf was promising him that it will be the last time that he asks Gwaihir to carry him, and that he will not be too heavy. I'm going to read you the relevant passage from The Return of the King. "Twice you have borne me, Gwaihir, my friend," said Gandalf. "Thrice shall pay for all if you are willing. You will not find me a burden much greater than when you bore me from Zirak-Zigil, where my old life burned away." "I would bear you," answered Gwaihir, "whither you will, even were you made of stone." "I would bear you whither you will, even were you made of stone," is a big change from "you're too heavy, I'll drop you off in Rohan, good luck." Gwaihir doesn't take orders from Gandalf, but here he is basically saying, I'm at your disposal. I will carry you wherever you want to go, no matter how heavy you are. Even if you are made of stone, I'll carry you wherever. There is only one that could command the eagles, and that is Manwë. It stands to reason that Manwë had them go to the Black Gate and asked him to assist Gandalf in particular. Okay, next question. I like this one. Did Sauron and Finrod Felagund really get into a singing fight in the Silmarillion? Yes, but don't think of it like as a call and response, singing duel from some bad musical or like a rap battle or anything like that. This was a battle of true magic. Finrod really should have known better. There's no magic in creation greater than the Ainur Lindala, the music of the Ainur, the Holy Ones. And Sauron, fallen though he is an angel. He is an Ainu. He was part of that event. He had a hand in the creation of the universe. The music can warp reality on a fundamental level, and the most powerful elvish song ever concocted was not going to do anything to Sauron if he was prepared for it. This was probably the worst type of duel that Finrod could have challenged Sauron to. He was dabbling with the fundamental creative power of Ilúvatar's first creations, and he was up against a seasoned user of this magic. Perhaps Finrod should have chosen tic-tac-toe or rock, paper, scissors or something like that. He might have had a little better luck. The story would have gone very different. I just want you to stop for a moment and imagine that, okay? I want you to think about Finrod, like, okay, 1, 2, scissor cuts paper, I got you on the rope, Sauron, So, yeah, it really was, it was a singing battle, but when they sing, they're altering reality. It is the truest and purest form of magical possible. Okay, next question. I like this one. This came in from John Thompson, who asked, imagine that Maglor shows up at the Grey Havens in the Third Age and asks to be allowed to board a ship to Valinor. How would Círdan receive him? It's an interesting question, and I gave it some thought, and I don't think in the end, it really doesn't actually matter all that much. At the end of the First Age, after the War of Wrath, the ban on the Noldor returning to the Undying Lands was lifted, with certain exceptions. The only named exception that we know of is Galadriel, who was forgiven at the end of the Third Age due to her actions in the War of Ring, and particularly not taking the One Ring from Frodo. So, the first question that we must ask ourselves is, who were the other exceptions? Maglor seems very likely. He was a kinslayer. He was one of the leaders of the rebellion against the Valar. He was a certified Feanorian, a son of Feanor. So what we know of Maglor is that he did not seem to seek forgiveness, but wandered Middle-earth singing of his misdeeds until he passed out of history. Now the next question is, how did Galadriel know that she was forgiven? She even says it in the moment of Frodo, that she will pass into the West, having passed the test. It seems to me that the elves know in an innate spiritual level whether they're allowed to return or not. This being said, does Círdan know? Surely he knows who Maglor is, and that he is not to go west. But if Maglor was pardoned by the Valar and knew this, does Círdan also know innately as well that this other guy can go west? And if he doesn't know that, does he trust Maglor? Does he believe his words? Here's where I get into the whole aspect of where it really doesn't matter. The first point I'd like to make is that I really don't believe that Círdan's function is a gatekeeper or a judge. He builds the ships, he guards Mithlond, and presides over Lindon in general, but I don't see him as a particular mouthpiece for the Valar in a sense. He's never been to Aemon. He's a Sinda. He doesn't have that strong connection with the West. When Frodo and Bilbo sailed west, they had the authority of Gandalf with them. It's different with Samwise. We can assume that Gandalf probably told Círdan to eventually expect that Sam would show up to return and allow him passage. But once again, that's the authority of Gandalf, not the authority of Círdan. So the other reason why I think it really doesn't matter is that elves don't need to go through the Grey Havens to sail west. Now, it's the easiest passage, and Círdan's ships are the finest ships there are, but we may strongly surmise that the straight path might lead directly to Mithlond, but Legolas didn't need to leave from there. When Legolas left with Gimli in tow, he went from the Bay of Belfalas. He built his own ship. So if Maglor, if he felt that he should return to Aemon and that he felt that he was able to return to Aemon, he would not need to seek the Grey Havens. He could sail from anywhere. In the case that Maglor did indeed show up at the Grey Havens, how would Círdan receive him? So now we get into opinions, because we really don't know. So strictly as a matter of opinion, I am of the opinion that Círdan is a man of few words, and he would not say much to Maglor, but he would allow him use of one of his ships, as it was not in his function to be a judge or a gatekeeper. Okay, next question. Okay, this is an interesting one. How was it possible for Bilbo to carry the One Ring without being corrupted by it when nobody else could do so, not even Gollum? Bilbo was corrupted. He wasn't corrupted to the extent that Gollum was, but he definitely was corrupted. Bilbo's corruption was subtle, and I'll get into why it was subtle in a little bit, but I want to state that the corruption was almost instant. When Bilbo came out of the mountain, he searched for the dwarves, and eventually he saw Balin looking for him. Bilbo thought it would be funny if he put on the ring, snuck past Balin, and revealed himself to the dwarves with a bit of theatricality. And they asked him, how did you get past Balin? Hey, Balin's an excellent watcher. He's the lookout of the group. He has really good eyesight, and he's very perceptive. How did you get past him? And Bilbo just sort of like, well, I'm just that good. I'm just a really good burglar. And this is already sort of a lie, but it's, you could say it's not. He's just merely using the tools of the trade of a burglar in this sense, and he doesn't have to reveal that he has the ring. Okay, but let's move on a little bit. The thing is that he had a compulsion to keep the ring secret. Eventually, he's forced to reveal the ring in Mirkwood to the dwarves, and he uses it extensively in getting the party out of Thranduil's dungeon and to Esgaroth. When asked, how did you get such a thing, Bilbo did something that he didn't do before. He blatantly lied. He told something that was the opposite of the truth. He didn't just leave things out, he made up a story. He said that Gollum wished to give him the ring as a prize for winning the riddle game, but Gollum couldn't find it. Bilbo had already found it, so he asked to be let out instead. Now, we know this didn't happen. Gollum would never want to give up his precious, and when he came to suspect that Bilbo might have it, he flew into a rage and tried to kill him. So Gandalf knew the story was a lie as soon as he heard it, and he spent many years haranguing Bilbo to tell the truth, to the point where it created quite a strain on their friendship. Bilbo eventually did reveal the truth to Gandalf, and Gandalf had to wonder, why would Bilbo, who is normally a paragon of honesty, lie, and to what end? Bilbo did not need to lie, but he felt the need to legitimize his claim to the ring, to make it his, not something that he stole, to something that he was going to get as a prize, even if he did find it laying on the floor. While Bilbo does admit to finding the ring lying around, he makes up this story so that it's his by right. Not that it matters. So, having this guy who's normally very honest telling not only a lie, but a very stupid lie, was another link in the long chain of suspicions that Gandalf had that led to him eventually identifying it as Sauron's ruling ring. Even Frodo, the only other person that Bilbo told the truth to, at least until he told it to a whole bunch of people at the Council of Elrond, wondered, why would Bilbo lie? And he preferred the truth to the story that Bilbo had told. The One Ring also became precious to Bilbo. He was unable to let it go without great assistance from Gandalf, and he had to be quite stern with him. Bilbo, even in his temporary madness, accused Gandalf of trying to steal the ring from him, which, if you know Gandalf, you know that's ridiculous. So let's get back to why the corruption was so much more pronounced in Gollum than it was in Bilbo or Isildur and yes, it's true that Gollum had the ring for much longer than any of them, but also, the most important thing, he was nasty. He was a nasty piece of work. In Letter 214, Tolkien called Daigle a mean little soul, and he said Smeagol was meaner and greedier. The two hobbits were jerks already, and therefore the One Ring had a lot to work with. It's no wonder that the argument over who gets to keep the ring, the pretty little thing that Daigle found, rapidly escalated to violence and murder. With a good person like Bilbo, there's not much to work with there. Frodo, there's not a lot to work with, and Frodo even gets the ring all the way to the very seat of its power before succumbing. Sam is the best of them all, and he hands the ring back to Frodo with only a slight twang of reluctance. The ring has almost nothing to work with Sam. It only gave him a very silly vision of himself as a great hero who could turn all of Middle-earth into a garden, which is something that Sam does not actually want to do. Sam has many fantastic virtues, but the biggest is his humility. He sees himself as a gardener, not a hero. This doesn't mean that he wishes to impose the beauty of nature on anyone else. I don't think Sam would impose anything on anyone else other than perhaps proper manners. He only wants a bit of garden of his own that he could tend to. Now, Isildur was a noble king who did really nothing wrong other than not taking good advice that was given to him. He was anathema to the One Ring. It so actively rejected him that he found it painful to even touch the ring, much less wear it. The ring had nothing to work with Isildur. Gollum was a nasty person whose only friend was also a nasty person. He didn't have far to fall, is what I'm getting at. Okay, next question. Okay, oh, this is a good one. Why didn't the... Well, it's not a good one, but it's a fun one. Why didn't the Fellowship of the Ring set out for Mordor on horseback to reach their destination even faster as opposed to walking? Horses weren't really suited for the unique sort of journey that they were making. There are several reasons why horses wouldn't work, so let's talk about them. First of all, stealth. A group of horsemen is a lot more conspicuous and a lot louder than a group of people walking, and as they were under no delusions that the 9 riders would not be reporting back to Mordor, the Fellowship had indeed stayed at Rivendell for quite some time, so they knew that those Nazgul were going to be out there. Sauron knew the One Ring was in Imladris. They needed to get the ring and the ring bearer to the south as silent and as unseen as they could. Another thing to consider is terrain. Horses are fantastic when you're traveling on a road. Not so much for traveling over wild terrain. Also consider the time of year they were leaving Rivendell. It was winter, and their original plan was to cross Carithris, the mountains. There was no way they were going to get the horses over the mountains. The third thing to talk about is supplies. Glorfindel had a horse, or supply of horses, really. There was no indication that there were a great deal of horses there, though. We knew of Asphodel, but were there 9 horses or however many horses they would have needed that could be given to them, that could be spared, that weren't going to make it all the way because of the terrain, because they had to cross the mountains? The fourth thing to talk about is the experience of the riders. Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, these guys are experts at riding horses. Boromir, not so much. He lost his horse on the way to Imladris. He doesn't really have a great track record with horses. The hobbits are accustomed to ponies, but not horses. Gimli's not accustomed to riding at all. With 5 members of the Fellowship that would each need to double up with another experienced rider, this leaves not enough experienced riders, especially since Boromir is not really great on a horse. And the last thing to talk about is provisions. Horses need to be fed, they need to be watered, and going into the wild, this means that they would need to not only worry about having enough food to feed themselves, but the horses as well. So even if some of these aspects were overcome, the journey on horse, they would have to take major roads, which would be thereby known to Saruman or Sauron or both of them, or they would be forced to abandon the animals at Carithras, only to find that they cannot cross at all and still trek through Moria. And they were never going to bring the horses into Moria. They weren't even going to bring Bill the Pony into Moria. So there you have it. Okay, this one's sort of in the same vein. In The Lord of the Rings, why didn't the Fellowship travel east from Lothlorien, go past Mirkwood Forest, and enter Mordor secretly from the northeast, bypassing the Black Gate and Rohan entirely? Oh, wow, man. Oh, wow. This is a sort of idea that if you said it, if you were a member of the Fellowship of the Ring, and you can't, or if you were at the Council of Elrond and you said, well, why don't you do this? And you said that, I think Gandalf would yell at you for a good solid 5 minutes. You know what I'm saying? It would be bad. So let me show you something. Here's the map of Mordor. So what you're talking about is going all the way this way, around these mountains, and then you'd have to cross this way, and then there's more mountains, and keep in mind we're crossing not 1 but 2 rivers here, and then we're coming up to Mount Doom right here, and notice that we have to go right by Barad-dûr. I don't know why somebody circled it in this scan. I don't quite know why, but I just wanted to demonstrate it's not good. You are making the route way too long, and entirely too much time is spent in Mordor. Not to mention that whole open-sided eastern bit of Mordor, it's connected to eastern lands that Sauron has conquered, and that's probably his trade routes and his supply routes. It's all very watched. Now, let's examine the external reasons why this wouldn't work. Not all of the Fellowship was planning on going to Mordor, or certainly not Boromir. Boromir had no plans to go to Mordor. And Aragorn wished for Legolas, Merry, and Pippin to follow Boromir to Minas Tirith, while he, Sam, and Gimli would trek into Mordor. If the Fellowship split earlier at Lothlorien, then Boromir still contends with Saruman's forces, and they likely still carry off Merry and Pippin. But now Aragorn's not there, and the whole thing kind of falls apart. Does Boromir make the decision to attempt the rescue, if he survives even? Does he come to Fangorn and meet Gandalf without Aragorn at Helm's Deep? Is Boromir there? Does he give the king the speech needed to ride out in valor? Is he dead? If he survived, did he even go to Rohan, or did he go straight to Minas Tirith with Legolas? Removing Aragorn from the narrative in Gondor means that Minas Tirith falls when the Corsairs of Umbar arrive. And without having taken the Pass of the Dead, and with Denethor not falling into despair and taking himself out of the equation, there is no return of the king. No one rides out to the Black Gate and distracts Sauron's forces, which lets the ring-bearer have an easier journey, especially considering that he has to survive the burden in Mordor for the extremely elongated length that he must now travel within Sauron's domain. So, yeah, approaching Mordor from the northwest is a terrible idea because the volcano's in the northeast. Okay, next question. Okay, this one came from Harry Pringle. I don't think that's his real name, but, you know. Why does Frodo offer Glorfindel, Boromir, and Aragorn the ring, even though he's accepted the burden of being the ring bearer? Why is he just giving it up in a way? Isn't he aware of any repercussions which would likely follow? So first off, Frodo at no point offered the ring to Boromir. He did offer it to Galadriel, he did offer it to Aragorn, and both of these situations are unique, but let's examine them to see why he did this. First, let's talk about Galadriel, because that's the most interesting, the most analyzed. I've talked about it a lot. Frodo has accepted the burden, but in the presence of Galadriel, and the scrutiny that she's putting him under, he suddenly feels inadequate for the task. He doesn't say much. He doesn't thrust the ring out and say, take this away from me, please, I can't do it. But he simply tells her that he will offer it to her if she were to ask him to. It is possible that Frodo was trying to prove that the ring had not become precious to him, as it had to Gollum and Bilbo before him, but I think that it is more likely that faced with what seems to be pure good, he finds himself unsuited for the quest, and Galadriel would make a far better ring-bearer than himself. Galadriel had indeed sought to scrutinize Frodo, but now she finds herself scrutinized. The scene isn't only about whether or not Frodo is going to give up the ring, but whether or not Galadriel actually would accept it, and she has decided that she will not. It should be mentioned, though, that the earlier distinction I made, Frodo didn't offer the ring. He just told her that he would offer the ring if she was to ask. But would he really? Do we know that for certainty that if Galadriel says, yes, please, give it to me, would he be able to go through it? It took the kindness and the patience of Gandalf, along with some degree of sternness, for Bilbo to pass the ring to Frodo. And he had said to Gandalf previously that he would pass the ring to Frodo. But when faced with the actual task, it was suddenly very hard to do. Upon identifying the ring as the One Ring in Bag End, Frodo states that he wants it destroyed, and Gandalf tests him. He says, okay, throw it into your fireplace. Frodo cannot, even though it was just demonstrated to him that throwing the ring into the fireplace not only could not destroy it, but wouldn't even make it warm. It has become precious to him, and though he talks about giving it up, he cannot even put it in the fire that he knows will not harm it. My point here is that words and deeds are different, and offering the ring is not the same as giving the ring, and I think that Frodo would find it in this instance to be very difficult to give the ring to Galadriel. Now let's take a look at the scene with Aragorn. This is much earlier in the story. It's in Imladris, and at this point Frodo has not taken on the burden fully. He thought his quest was over, that all he was going to do was come to Rivendell and bring the rings to the elves, and it would be safe there, and that's that. He would stay for a while, till the heat dies down, and then he would go home. It was a bit later in the discussion, after they talked about all these other ideas, chucking it into the sea, giving it to Bombadil, and the much dumber idea of giving it to the eagles was not even talked about. No one was foolish enough to voice such an opinion. Frodo had fully accepted the burden at this point. But this is after the scene with Aragorn. Aragorn, you have to view him through Frodo's eyes. Before this, he knows Aragorn's true name, but he's Strider. to him, a ranger that he met in Bree, who was a friend of Gandalf's. He reaches the last homely house, and he's surprised to find that Aragorn is a friend of Bilbo's as well, and Bilbo explains to him that Aragorn is a man of Numenor, and that it's not long after this that Frodo learns of Aragorn's true heritage. In learning that Aragorn is a man who should be the king of the realm of Elendil, which includes not merely Gondor, but Arnor and Well, including the Shire, because the Shire is part of Arnor, Frodo is in awe, and he blurts out that it is Aragorn, not himself, not the elves, that is the owner, or at least the warden of the ring. Now, Frodo's initial goal was to give up the ring, as I said, stay for a while, go home. And that would have made a much duller story for him, but in this case, he is voicing the opinion that though he came here to hand the ring to Elrond, he might do better to hand it to Aragorn himself. And of course, Aragorn tells him that the ring belongs to Sauron, and to Sauron only, and that he has no claim to it, nor any desire to take it. Okay, next question. This one's from Tomas Kasperwis. I hope I'm saying it right. Kasperwis. How were Ents created? It is said that they were created by Yavanna to protect the trees, but Ainur cannot create sentient life. The case of dwarves shows that such creations are not taken lightly by Eru and gain sentience only thanks to him. So the Ents are thought of as Yavanna's children. Their method of creation was not the same as Aula creating the dwarves. She had created them before even entering Arda, without even realizing it. So here's what we gleaned from a surface-level reading of the Silmarillion. Aule creates the dwarves. He gets a stern fatherly talking to by Iluvatar, but after some discussion, he gets God's stamp of approval. Yavanna, who is upset that there is going to be yet another race that is going to be cutting down her trees and not just appreciating them for their beauty, she goes to Manwe. Some words are exchanged. Manwe's like, okay, I got to pray on it for a while. He talks to God, and then he comes back and talks to her, and then she goes back and she talks to her husband, sort of triumphant, and says his children will harm her children at great peril, and he gives that mic drop line, well, they're going to need wood. So, note the exact wording I use there. The dwarves are the children of Aule, adopted by Iluvatar, but when I refer to Yavanna's children, I wasn't talking about the Ents, I was talking about trees. Ents are the children of Iluvatar, all the same as elves or men. Yavanna had a hand in their creation in the Ainu Lindala. While Yavanna goes to Manwe for counsel in this instance, it is Iluvatar that gives the counsel. Manwe is just the intermediary, and let's examine the exact words of Iluvatar relayed to Yavanna by Manwe. Do then any of the Valar suppose that I did not hear all the song, even the least sound of the least voice? Behold, when the children awake, then the thought of Yavanna will awaken also, and it will summon spirits from afar. And they will go among the Kelvar and Olvar, and some will dwell within, and be held in reverence. And their just anger shall be feared, for a time while the firstborn are in their power, while the secondborn are young. But dost thou not now remember, Kementari, that thy thought sang, not always alone? Did not thy thought and mine meet also, so that we took wing together like great birds that soar above the clouds? That also shall come to be by the heed of Iluvatar. And before the children awake, there shall go forth with wings like the wind the eagles of the lords of the west. So first Iluvatar essentially says, did you think I wasn't listening when you sang for me? I heard everything. Iluvatar led them in the themes, but it was the Ainur that made up the music. Iluvatar was the conductor who gave them a tune to improvise off of. Secondly, Iluvatar says, when the elves and the men awake, so too will the Ents, referring to the Ents as the thought of Yavanna. Yavanna created the Ents not in that moment in answer to the dwarves, but before she even arrived in the world, and Iluvatar heard her desire to have protectors of the trees, and he has provided. Thirdly, after a bit about how the Ents will be revered and feared, he gives a time when the Ents will awaken, shortly after men. He calls her by another of her names, Kementari, which means Queen of the Earth. This is Iluvatar truly seen as a father figure to the Ainur. He says, basically, I heard you, I listened, I trust you, you are not alone in this, we are in this together. So, though it was the design of Yavanna, it was Iluvatar that created the Ents, without even realizing it. she put her thought into the music that the trees would need protectors. They would need protection. And this prayer was hearkened by God, who gave her thoughts form. And that's what the world is the thoughts of the angels given form by Iluvatar. Okay, next question. We only have 3 left. This one came in from Daniel Guerra, who asks, if Gollum wanted the precious One Ring so badly, why didn't he wear it more often when he had it? That's a very good question, and despite some other people that answered your question, Tolkien did, in fact, answer this. A lot of people answered this guy's question saying, well, Tolkien never said. He did say, the ring was precious to Gollum, but it was also anathema to him at the same time. He loved and hated the ring much the same as he loved and hated himself. In The Hobbit, it was explained that after he got the ring, Gollum wore it constantly, but eventually he just couldn't stand to do that anymore. He then kept the ring in his pocket, close to his skin, but eventually it galled him, so he kept it hidden on his island, only used it when he needed it. This is the One Ring, Sauron's power distancing itself from Gollum and rejecting him. Bilbo mentioned that the ring changed size and weight and tried to get away from it a few times, so he kept it on a chain. Another who kept the ring on a chain was Isildur, who not only kept the ring, but tried to master it, to dominate it and bend it to his will. The One Ring's reaction to this was more extreme. It actively fought him to the point where Isildur, as I mentioned earlier, couldn't even stand the pain of touching it. The ring gave him pain. And when he had to put it on one last time to attempt to escape the disaster of the Gladden Fields, he found it to be quite painful indeed. When Isildur surfaced from the water, he knew the ring was gone instantly. Whether by chance or design, it slipped away from him, and I would strongly surmise that it was probably the fact that he wasn't in pain was how he knew instantly that the ring was gone. So just as the One Ring can seduce others, it can also make itself less attractive. Though Gollum would never give away the ring or toss away the ring, he was too bound to it. So that's why he didn't wear it all the time. Good question, though. Okay, next question. This one, this is another anonymous one. If Sauron had known that Frodo was carrying the One Ring into Mordor, would he have sent an army to stop him from reaching Mount Doom? No. He would, if he knew about Frodo and what was going on, he wouldn't need an army to stop him. If Sauron was aware that Frodo and Sam were in Mordor carrying his ring, sending an army, he wouldn't do that. Men, goblins, they might take the ring, they might keep it. There's only 2 scenarios that would happen. The first of which is he sends the Nazgul. The 9 would encircle Frodo and Sam and demand that the ring bearer to don the ring, much as they did on Weathertop, and their powerful magic would eventually make Frodo succumb, and he'd put the ring on. Suddenly they'd know which hobbit has the ring. They would slay the other, capture Frodo. He would be brought to Barad-dûr, to Sauron, and Sauron would forcibly remove the ring from him, and Frodo would be tormented for keeping Sauron's ring, and Sauron would be unstoppable by any force in Middle-earth. The other scenario is almost the same exact thing, except it would be Sauron himself going down and retrieving the ring and cutting out the whole Nazgul thing. So either way, it would be bad for Frodo and Sam, obviously, but he wouldn't need an army. This would be something that would take a more personal touch, either he himself or his more trusted servants, the Nazgul. And they're trusted only because they're so bound to him. All right, and here's the last question, and this is a quick one. Did Aragorn know that he was the king the entire time? Yeah, he did. He got a hot tip from Elrond. Aragorn's father, Arathorn, died when he was very young. Aragorn was only 2 years old. And he came to be fostered by Lord Elrond in Imladris, which is actually a tradition amongst the chieftain of the Dunedain, of which Arathorn was. So due to his very young age and his heritage, he was given a fake name. They called him Estel, which means hope. And he was unaware of who his parents were or what his true name was. Well, I think he knew what his mother, but he didn't know who she was. He didn't know that his mother was important or that his father was important until he was 20 years old. So when Aragorn was 20, Elrond revealed his true name and his heritage, and he gave him Elendil's broken sword, Narsil. The motivation for Aragorn to become more than just the chieftain of the Dunedain and to pursue the kingship came from the fact that he had fallen in love with Arwen, and to wed her, Elrond said, then you must be the king to be worthy of her. So basically, did he know the entire time? Well, he once he was 20 years old. So for the past 67 years, he knew. But anyway, guys, if you made it all the way into the video, and this was, like I said, slightly bit of a long one, because we had so much to get through, but if you made it all the way here, you must have enjoyed the video, and you should probably give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, well, subscribe so you can be on the lookout for more videos. Like I said, I'm probably going to do a video just on the origins of hobbits. I have more of the gaming content for the Lord of the Rings coming up, so we'll see you guys next time.